democracy or republicanism, either one, I argue, is puritanical. It's hostile to pleasure and freedom. That kind of freedom, individual freedom.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Clair.
Welcome back, my Liberty Lynchburgs, to the Lions of Liberty podcast, your home for great conversations about the ideas of liberty. This is the 237th episode of this program, which means that you can find the show notes featuring links to just about everything we discuss over at lionsofliberty.com/237. Today's show is sponsored by our good friends at Health Excellence Select, who have put together the ultimate free market solution to your healthcare woes. Check them out at lionsofliberty.com/health. And unless this is your first episode, or unless you missed Monday's show and skipped to this one, you'll know that I had a great conversation with Thaddeus Russell, author of A Renegade History of the United States, this past Monday. And the conversation, he was so generous with his time. I really got to thank Thaddeus Russell for that, and that we just kept talking. We went well beyond the normal time that I give you for these episodes. So I did decide to split this into two parts, and I'm pleased to present to you now the second part of my interview with Thaddeus Russell. All right, Thaddeus, I want to just touch on a couple things in your book real quick, and then we'll maybe get into some current events and some stuff that's going on right now. So one thing, it's one of the first stories in your book, and it is about someone who is widely considered to be maybe the first casualty of the American Revolution, certainly the first death of the Boston Massacre, and that's Crispus Attucks, a guy whose name we hear, and we hear what happened to him as he was killed by British soldiers, but we don't really hear much about who he actually was. So what did your research show about who Crispus Attucks was and what actually might have occurred there at the Boston Massacre, which really is seen as the spark that lit the American Revolution?
So Crispus Attucks, we don't know for sure, but he was probably a bootlegger, a rum runner, transported rum illegally from the West Indies to the colonies, to the American colonies. We know that on that night of the Boston Massacre, in the bar where those people came from, it was full of drunks and some prostitutes, and they were probably gambling and probably dancing to bawdy music and doing all sorts of things they weren't supposed to be doing. Yeah, the Boston Massacre was that kind of people confronting the redcoats in the streets, and that's never talked about. And that is why John Adams, in the trial that followed the Boston Massacre, the trial of the redcoats, that's why John Adams was the lawyer for the redcoats for the British Army. And in the trial, he made it very clear. He said, we can't have a civilization with people like those who were shot. And he called them, he had all these epithets for them. He called them Jack Teagues and Irish rabble and Negroes, etc. And he was right. So, the project that John Adams and the Founding Fathers were undertaking was essentially democracy. Of course, I know there's a whole argument about republicanism versus democracy, but either way, it's a government by the people. We all agree on that, whether it's republicanism or democracy, government of or by the people. And they understood that a government of or by the people requires that the people discipline themselves. You can't be in a bar drinking all night long if you're going to run the place.
So how else are you going to get up and do your, work your 9 to 5 and contribute to capitalism and contribute to society?
First of all, you have to, okay, so there's that. You have to produce stuff, right, for there to be a civilization. But I'm not even talking about that. After you're done working all day producing stuff to make a civilization, you have to have a meeting, right, to decide how the neighborhood you live in Boston will be managed, where the streets will be, what the streets will be named. Will they be paved with cobblestones or something else? Shall we allow taverns to be on those streets? How many police officers should we have? Should we tax people? For how much should taxes be? It's right. It's just a ton of work, right? And if you're gonna manage an entire nation, which they were of course interested in, it's even more work. So democracy or republicanism, either one, I argue, is puritanical. It's hostile to pleasure and freedom. That kind of freedom, individual freedom, libertine freedom. And the Founding Fathers understood that. So the people who ran out of that bar that night, of the night of the Boston Massacre were the enemies of democracy, actually, in that way. And that's why John Adams was opposed to them.
Yeah, and that again is a theme throughout your entire book, really about how the sort of the ne'er-do-wells, whether it's Irishmen, Irish immigrants, whether it's slaves and former slaves, whether it's Jews, how these people really affected history. And as I was reading your book, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, this is definitely something I could kind of give to my progressive friends. I think they'll may resonate with a lot of these stories. They're talking about other cultures, the kind of stuff that they seem to appreciate. And then I get to a part where I realize, oh yeah, they might not actually like this, because then you're doing all this stuff about culture, and then suddenly we get to a point where you compare, the New Deal to fascism, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, they're going to throw this thing in the garbage. So can you just talk about, how that part of your book and why you decided to, keep going with your seeking out the truth here and not just trying to appease a certain audience?
Yeah. So the evidence is just simply overwhelming. And I'm not the first historian to say this or show it or write about it. I mean, there have been 3 or 4 pretty prominent historians, both here and in Germany, who have made this argument that the New Deal wasn't identical to European fascism, but it was clearly a sibling of European fascism, that there were many, many, many obvious similarities between the two, ideologically, in terms of policy, and very much culturally. It's just overwhelming, the evidence. I mean, from the way that the economy was organized in the early New Deal with the National Industrial Recovery Act, in which cartels were established in every major industry, cartels where, the leading businesses in each industry sat at a table with representatives of the government and sometimes union leaders, but usually it was government and business. And they would decide what the prices and wages and production quotas in those industries would be. That is exactly the economic model that was used in Italy under Mussolini and in Germany under Hitler. That particular thing, that economic component of fascism, which pretty much every scholar of fascism agrees that is fascist economics, we call corporatism. And I don't see a way to argue that wasn't what was happening in the early New Deal. And then you have, this sort of rampant militant nationalism during the New Deal, not just the World War II part, but all through the 1930s. This idea that we must all subsume our interest to the interest of the state, that working for the state, literally working for the state, building dams and bridges and roads, et cetera, through the public works projects.
I mean, they pivoted an entire industry towards manufacturing weapons of war.
In the early 40s, yes, absolutely. But even before then, right? So those were the best Americans, the people who were literally working for the state. And so massive public works projects, that was also central to Italian fascism and German fascism. Very generous welfare programs. Also, I mean, people don't understand this about Hitler's Germany. The Aryan working class in Germany did really, really well under Hitler. They were given lots and lots of stuff through welfare, free housing and, subsidized vacations and higher wages and all sorts of stuff through state intervention. Very, very similar. And yeah, I mean, and so sort of a militarization of society, not just rhetorically, but the way people were literally organized in the public works projects. Many of the public works projects were actually managed by the United States Army. This is all nearly identical to what was going on in Germany and Italy at the time. So, read it for yourself. It's a very long chapter. All the specific evidence is in there. If you look at the rhetoric of Roosevelt and Mussolini and Hitler, there's clear differences. So obviously genocidal anti-Semitism, they didn't all share, although Roosevelt was very much an anti-Semite. But the rhetoric is very, very similar. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that two of the biggest fans of the early New Deal from 34 to 36 or 7 were Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, who talked and wrote extensively about how they admired Roosevelt and what he was doing.
Well, that's just some great endorsements there.
Yeah, and then going the other direction, we don't have Roosevelt himself, but we have several New Dealers. I mean, people in the New Deal, in the White House and in Congress, and many, many, many progressives generally, progressive intellectuals who were major supporters of the New Deal, loving fascism in the 20s and 30s, especially the Italian variety. A lot of fans of Mussolini among American progressives and New Dealers. So, there you go. Does that mean that we were living in a fascist society in the 1930s and early 40s? I'd say, yeah, partly. It wasn't identical.
Sure.
No.
I mean, everything's a matter of degree. And there's no doubt, even today, more so today, we have elements of fascism, elements of socialism, elements of capitalism. It's a very amalgamated system we have in the United States.
What I would just say is that the New Deal was part of a transatlantic fascist movement. Right? That's what I would say about it.
Thaddeus, well, I want to move on real quick to touch on a few things. I follow you on social media, and you're pretty much always out there every day with an opinion on something. So I want to touch on just a couple issues. And why don't we just start actually with the story you mentioned earlier and didn't get to, the story about your friend Camille Foster.
Oh, so my son is he's 14 years old. He's an aspiring chef. He's very talented, very good at it.
I've seen your post on
Facebook
of his pop-up, I don't know what they actually call it, pop-up
restaurant. Yeah.
Restaurant. There you go. And it's got my mouth watering. So
yeah, so he had his first pop-up restaurant, which he had at his mother's house in Los Angeles last week. And my friend Camille Foster, I'm sure many of your listeners know him. He was on The Independents on Fox Business with Kennedy and Matt Welch. And he's a hardcore libertarian. He calls himself a Rothbardian anarchist. And he's Jamaican American. His parents are Jamaican immigrants. So he came to the pop-up and he was sitting at a table with a guy who's a big time sort of liberal Democrat, Bernie, but now Hillary supporter. And the topic of the election came up, and Camille said he would never vote for either one of them. And this enraged the Democrat so much that this was at my 14-year-old son's event, got up out of his chair, lifted his chair up off the ground and slammed it to the floor. And then here's the kicker, pointed his finger in Camille's face. This Democrat guy is a middle-class white guy from Venice Beach. pointed a finger in Camille's face.
It wasn't me, was it? That sounds
no, it was not you. Pointed a finger in Camille's face and said, "You don't understand the plight of minorities and immigrants."
This is to a minority immigrant.
Yes. Yeah.
A middle-class white man. Unbelievable.
So it's just, and then his wife said that, libertarians don't care about people. So there's first of all, I'm never going to see these people again. They're no longer friends of mine.
I would think not.
And then what they did to Camille is secondary. What they did to my son was the first reason. I'm never going to speak to that. But even that, if they assume that I'm a bad person for having these ideas, right? Why would I be friends with them? This is a big, big problem. I mean, that people with our kind of politics have, we are generally assumed to be, again, not sort of,
not just simply wrong or misguided, but actually bad people sometimes for holding certain beliefs.
Yeah, and I know this is true because as I said, I used to be one of them. I mean, that's what I assumed about conservatives in the past and libertarians in the past. I don't know how to overcome this, but boy, is it a big problem. I think I do know how to overcome it, which is, I think, what I do, which is that I tend to do, which is that I think every libertarian argument and position has a left-wing component to it, right? There's a component, I think, to every libertarian position on every issue that would appeal to the left. And I think you should start there. You begin every argument with that. So, for instance, free trade. The argument should begin with the fact that poverty has been reduced by about half globally in the last 30 years because of free trade, so that it benefits no one more than the poorest people on earth. You got to start there. I mean, they cannot accuse you of not caring about poor people if you start there. And just that fact is so devastating and so overwhelming to the anti-trade people. I don't know what they can do in response to that. By the way, one of the most amazing things to me, and it's just disgusting, is that every once in a while I check in and I do a search on the Nation website and the Mother Jones website and Think Progress and other big lefty websites, magazines and journals for any reporting, any mention of that fact, which came out, I think 2 years ago. The World Bank made that announcement that, global extreme poverty had been basically halved since the 1990s. They still have not mentioned it. Left-wingers, right? Radical reduction in poverty, and they're not interested.
Because it doesn't fit their narrative, I guess.
Right. So who doesn't care about people and who doesn't care about poor people? So I think you got to start with the left-wing component of your argument first. Put that forward first.
And then we have an issue where even when you kind of come at things from that angle, like say free trade, you have the politicians starting to catch on. So then they'll use free trade rhetoric. Now, Hillary Clinton she now sort of criticizes the TPP, even though she, helped to write it and went on a world tour to promote it. But, the politicians like that will say, free trade is great. We agree. Here's this 10,000 page document about how trade can be free.
10,000 pages with 10 million rules.
Exactly.
And what can be traded. Yeah.
And they're always going to kind of twist that rhetoric into to support something that's, completely opposite, which anybody that takes even, a cursory analysis of the TPP. I mean, just the fact that it's 10,000 pages should be a signal to people that there's more about it than just free trade. Because to me, if it's free trade, it's like a page that says, you guys can all trade.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. So, and guns, here's another one, right? I mean, so what I do with guns, you may have seen my stuff that I've written on gun control. I mean, the place to start with in the gun control argument from our position is to point to the history of gun control, which is thoroughly racist.
Right.
Thoroughly racist. I mean, explicitly
undeniably so.
Explicitly designed for 2 centuries to disarm, control, and oppress Black people. And there is no argument against that. I mean, that is not contested by anyone. I mean, it's impossible to contest it because we just have the Ku Klux Klan stating it as their mission to disarm Black ex-slaves. We have it as their stated mission, Ronald Reagan and the California legislature in the 1960s to disarm the Black Panthers, right? It's just over and over and over and over again. Start there. Gun control is racist. Here's the facts, right? Who doesn't care about people? Who doesn't care about poor people then? That's where you start. You start with the part of the argument that the left should share. That's where you should start.
I mean, I always try to find common ground with other people that aren't going to, necessarily share my beliefs, especially when they see that label. I mean, even like when thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, there's definitely some issues that I think we should, in theory, have common ground on, like maybe not militarizing the police so much.
Sure.
But when they put out, they recently put out this manifesto. I know you saw it and commented on it. I mean, It kind of touches on a couple little things, but it basically just amounts to the government is racist, so let's just give them way more power over everything we do, which just seems to fly directly in the face of what the actual stated issue is.
Yeah, I was depressed all day because of that thing. I
mean, these are groups I feel like we should, libertarians and people that care about these issues should have almost a natural affinity towards, but they're making it difficult.
Yeah, I mean, BLM was really great in a lot of ways, in a lot of new ways. One of the ways in which they were great early on was and still are, in their, uncompromising criticism of the Democratic Party, right? And best of all, identifying the Democratic Party as the leaders of the war on drugs, and being, uncompromising on the Clintons and how they were architects of the war on drugs and mass incarceration, right? I mean, that's something that the left and liberals in particular have just ignored forever and ever. So BLM has made some very important interventions, and them as a group stating that they would not endorse any candidate, and being as hard on Bernie as they were on Hillary. And, I mean, they've done some really great, and novel things on the left. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping this platform that they adopted that is basically, if Ta-Nehisi Coates and Chairman Mao had a baby, I mean, that's what this program would be. It's so terrible. I mean, it's tribalism and communism together. It's just awful. I don't know how many people they actually represent. You know, you have to be careful about this. There really is, in a sense, there is no such thing as Black Lives Matter as a coherent movement or as an organized movement. You know, it's a whole bunch of people and many, many organizations. And I think most people aren't in an organization. So who are these people actually who wrote this? But it's depressing. Black Lives Matter, I can say this about it, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, is that it is essentially, it's a movement of Black middle-class, college-educated young people. It really is it's a politics that comes out of the campus left, academic left. It's pretty obvious that's in their discourse, their rhetoric, the way they talk about things, their ideology generally. I can see it because I know it well. And, you know, it's not terribly surprising that they would go communist here because that's who the academic left is. I don't know how to intervene on that. It's really hard. It's really, really hard, except to say what I said yesterday on social media, which is, hey, you had this fantastic critique of the government being the source of all your problems and being racist and murderous and shooting Black people in the streets, which we all agree with. And now you're asking them to control Black schools and Black jobs and Black food and water and the internet.
There's a real disconnect there.
You know, that's, God, they're probably just going to ignore that, but you just have to keep going. Because the argument that I'm making, that's not a conservative argument. I mean, I'm arguing that, you know, I'm agreeing that the government is the enemy of Black people. I think it's the enemy of all people, but it's certainly the enemy of, very much in this country, the enemy of Black people. I absolutely agree with them on that. I want them to have less of an enemy, you know, and I'm just thinking they're identifying, they're somehow confusing their enemy with their friends. So it's hard.
Yeah, well, Thaddeus, I think for a lot of my listeners in the healthcare realm, their enemy is Obamacare. So I need to take a quick break to tell my listeners about a great solution to your Obamacare woes provided by our friends at Health Excellence Select. You know, I'm a freelancer and I purchased my own health insurance, and I was hit by some serious sticker shock after the implementation of Obamacare. My premiums and deductibles were skyrocketing. And as someone who keeps myself pretty healthy, I knew that I was getting a raw deal for a product I simply didn't want. This caused me to seek an alternative, and I found an amazing alternative in the form of health sharing, a killer concept where healthy individuals agree to share their medical costs. That's right. It's a voluntary free market system for paying for your health care that also, thanks to an exemption, covers the Obamacare mandate. Our friends at Health Excellence Select have kicked it up a notch by creating a full service package to handle all of your health care needs. Trust me, I'm not just a proponent of health sharing, I'm also a client. This has been one of the greatest things I've ever done to leave the Obamacare system in favor of what our friends at Health Excellence Select are doing. To learn more, head over to lionsofliberty.com/health. And don't hesitate to give my man Jeff Cantor a call at 440-283-6849. Be sure to mention Lions of Liberty. Yeah, I mean, Thaddeus, we've gone on pretty long here, and I don't want to keep you all day, but I did mention that we'd get back to this. So I do want to quickly touch on, you know, you mentioned you do have some critiques or major disagreements with libertarianism. We're not going to break them all down, but why don't you just pick one critique that you have of, I guess, maybe commonly held libertarian beliefs, and we'll touch on that real quick, and then we'll hit on your Renegade University a little bit, too.
Okay, well, I don't know. Let's see. I guess the big one that bothers me is the non-aggression principle. So, according to the non-aggression,
I can feel some people in my audience just sitting in their chairs with their, they're starting to get tingly and starting to build up the blood pressure just hearing that. But go on.
Good. All right. So, the non-aggression principle says that the Mexican-American kid in Yuma, Arizona, working at the Walmart there should not steal from the Walmart or should not sneak away during his break, take a longer break than he's supposed to, or cheat on his time card, right? Essentially steal from Walmart. Of course, the NAP would say that, right? That's an act of aggression on his part, I think the NAP would say, and libertarians, I think, would say. And what I want to ask is, how did Walmart get there in the first place in the middle of the desert in Yuma, Arizona? It was massive, sustained government intervention both directly violent in terms of conquering that land, removing the people who were on it, and then in all sorts of other ways, which are violent either directly or indirectly, in terms of building the streets, the roads that lead to Walmart, that make Walmart possible.
And now this kid has very little options of where to work and where to earn a living.
Thank you. This kid happened to be born a Mexican-American kid in that godforsaken place through no fault of his own, through no choice of his own, and has gotten zero in terms of subsidies and protection from the government, certainly the way that Walmart has. And Walmart happens to be the only, this is very important, basically the only or one of the very few jobs available to him to make a living in that area. All right. So what are you telling me he should and shouldn't do? More importantly, where are you telling me the aggression began? Who started the aggression? Who initiated the aggression? I would say the state initiated the aggression on behalf of Walmart before this kid was even born. That's what he was born into. So, to me, then it becomes a question of self-interest on part of the kid. I would say to him, if you are absolutely sure you can get away with stealing shit from Walmart, do it.
That is definitely going to rankle some people. But I do think you make a good point, though. I mean, it's something that I struggle with all the time. Yeah, like, I'm not going to disagree with the non-aggression principle in a bubble. If someone punches me in the face, they have violated the NAP, and I think that they have committed an injustice upon me. But in a lot of other issues, like the one you brought up, there's just such a bigger context. We're so obsessed with private property, and I agree with theories about private property and how it should be justly acquired. But look around us. How much of what is considered private property that's owned by corporations was actually justly acquired in any sort of way that we could actually look at, other than the fact that we just say now it's this private property of Walmart. But if you go back historically, there are human beings who were literally murdered to create that land and create that quote unquote private property. So, I mean, I do think that there is just so much context that often gets lost. It's not that I disagree with the concept of non-aggression, but sometimes, like you're saying, we completely forget about the historical context and what has actually led to the conditions that so many people find themselves in.
Let me like flesh out my example just a little bit more. So every single day, the government, according to libertarian ideas, steals money from that Mexican-American kid to pay for the streets that lead to Walmart, that allow Walmart to exist. Right. They steal from all of us, but including that kid. Again, who's being aggressed upon here? Yeah, it's annoying to me.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think a great example of just, I mean, I don't know if it necessarily disproves the non-aggression theory, but I mean, it shows that I think we can't just say non-aggression principle and just move on. We have to have a conversation that delves into things a lot more deeply.
Well, what I would say about it, I think it's, on the one hand, it's a little silly, I suppose, but more importantly, to me, it is often, not always, but often used in the service of conservative or reactionary or really non-libertarian ideas.
Basically, just simply in the defense of corporations, as if all these corporations were these wonderful free market institutions that just sprung up on private property that they peacefully acquired.
It becomes pro-corporatist, I guess, is what I want to say.
Now, that's one of the biggest things. It's Kevin Carson called them the vulgar libertarians, people that kind of defend anything and everything corporation as if it were actually a free market that we live in, which is just really not seeing any of the reality of our current society.
Right. I mean, I know, like, most good libertarians are very well aware of corporatism, and they're great on that concept, and I love them for that. But I think they miss this thing about the NAP being in conflict with that.
All right, well, I hope that does give some people out there that that have these beliefs a little bit something to think about, because I think that one thing we need to do is look at the nuance of our situations a lot more deeply. It's something that libertarians and people of all political beliefs can really do more. And I think that's the kind of thought that you, I think, seek to inspire in your students and seek to inspire, with your writing and your courses and your social media commentary, the whole thing. So I know that the culmination of your life's work essentially here is really coming to a head, because you're about to launch your own university, Renegade University, which, as I mentioned way at the top of the show, was you're calling it the School for Dangerous Ideas. So why don't you just briefly describe what you're doing with Renegade University, how people can find out more about it, and give them the whole spiel.
Yeah, we'll be launching this fall of 2016. I will have lectures that will be available in video and audio format that you can download. I will also be doing in-person seminars in cities across the country: Portland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, maybe Austin, maybe Boston. And then I will also have interactive online seminars where we will discuss the ideas in the Renegade History of the United States. We'll do American history generally. There will be a course on the history of American foreign policy, that's the book I'm working on right now, and political philosophy. I took a poll of all the prospective students of Renegade University, and those were the topics they were most interested in. So we're going to start with those courses, and we'll be launching hopefully in October.
Great. Well, Thaddeus Russell, I want to thank you so much for coming on for a pretty good amount of time with me here today. It's a really fascinating conversation, and I've really been fascinated by your work and by your commentary in general, largely because it doesn't fit into any really political, set of beliefs, even including libertarianism, even though obviously there's a ton of crossover here. But I really do appreciate your perspective on things, and I think we need a lot more voices like yourself out there that are challenging, not just our modern political beliefs, but the way we view history as well.
Well, thanks, Mark. That's a high compliment. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Thaddeus. We'll be in touch.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Whew. Well, guys, I don't know about you, but I'm flabbergasted. I'm floored in a good way from my interview with Thaddeus Russell. Now, it's a little different for me because I did this whole interview with Thaddeus in one sitting. You got to listen to it in two parts on last Monday's episode, number 236, and today's episode, number 237. I had a lot of content for you, so I wanted to divvy it up a little bit. If you don't like what I did, if you don't like that I split it into two parts, that's okay. I'm just trying it out. First time I've really done this. But if you don't, you can express your dismay, or you can tell me you liked it. You like having this split up into two parts. Either way, you can tell me by joining our private Facebook group, the Lions of Liberty Forum. It's completely free to join. We just need to verify that you're a real person and not a Nigerian prince scam artist, because believe it or not, we've gotten a few of those trying to get their way in. But if you look like a normal person, especially if you have some mutual friends in the liberty world, any way you can make it easier for me to realize that you are someone who should be there, you'll get right in, and you can leave comments for us. You can interact with myself and my other Lions of Liberty cohorts, Brian McWilliams, John Odermatt. The whole gang is in there, having fun and having a good time and talking about the ideas of liberty. That's obviously why I do this, to advance this conversation. And I think we did that in many ways with Thaddeus Russell today. And, I know a lot of you won't necessarily agree with his stance on the non-aggression principle, but even talking to him, I don't think he's against this concept, but he's trying to point out how it's oversimplified, and it doesn't really tell you the context of a situation. Now, we have a very complicated history in this country. That's what Thaddeus tries to uncover through his work. A lot of the things about history that we don't really know, that are not pushed to the forefront or are not even mentioned at all in most of our schools and universities. But what libertarianism really needs is to try to look at the context. Now, obviously, libertarianism is not a thing. It's a bunch of people. I understand this. But a lot of libertarians, and myself included, I'm including past versions of myself, need to take a look at a lot of these issues in a bigger picture. We can't reflexively always, defend corporations. And when I say we, I know it's not necessarily my audience, but there are people out there like this that seem to staunchly defend the free market in every and all areas, when the fact is we do not have a free market. You cannot defend the world we live in now with a wonderful Rothbardian free market where everybody justly acquired their property, because that is just not recognizing the world we live in. Now, I'm not saying we need a whole bunch of laws to try to go fix all the injustices of the past. That's kind of difficult to do, and I'm not saying there's an easy solution there, but we do need to think about things in the larger context, especially when we're talking about property rights. Property rights don't mean jack if the property originally acquired is not justly acquired. Now, maybe at some point history has gone on so far that it's hard to really discern what's just and what's not. It's a complicated thing. But I think that looking at the nuance of situations is important, and I thought that was a really compelling example that Thaddeus brought up about a Mexican-American kid working at Walmart, because that's his only option. Does he have to be honest with Walmart? A lot of people might say yes. Thaddeus would say no. Frankly, I'm not sure. I think it's a difficult issue. I really do. And I think this is the kind of things that we need to be pushing ourselves with. We need to push ourselves to think deeper, to think in a more nuanced way, to think outside the box, because not only is that going to help us parse our ideas out better, it's going to help us communicate with people of all ilks better, of all political ilks, of all political persuasions. That's what I strive to do here at Lions of Liberty. I strive to advance this conversation, not just within the little libertarian niche, but I want to try to get us to all be able to communicate these ideas and communicate ideas in general with people of all political beliefs, because that's how we're going to change things, guys. We got to communicate with our fellow man. That's why I picked up this microphone one day. That's why I learned how to do a podcast, because I realized that the key to changing anything that we're upset about is by communicating the ideas effectively to other people, making them palatable, not watering them down, mind you. Not at all. We have to have hard principles, steadfast principles, but we have to realize the best ways to apply them and the best ways to communicate them. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I do seek them out here. And I'm so thankful for all my fans out there, everybody who has contributed to this program: John Odermatt, Brian McWilliams, Howie Snowden, Rico, JB Lube, and all the guys that have appeared in our roundtables. I don't know why I'm saying this now as if this is the last episode. It is by no means the last episode of this program, but it's going to take some time out just to thank everybody who has really got us here. And at the end of the day, nobody has gotten us here more so than the fans of this program, the fans who have been out there subscribing on iTunes, subscribing on Stitcher, subscribing on Google Play, telling your friends and family about this program, saying, hey, you know that crazy liberty stuff I'm talking about? Why don't you give this show a listen? You might find it interesting. You might understand where I'm coming from a little better. So please do share this program. Share it on your social media. You can share it from our main Facebook page, facebook.com/Lions of Liberty. You can retweet all our stuff by following us on Twitter @Lions of Liberty. There are really just so many ways you can tell people about this program. Don't forget, this coming Friday, guys, John Odermatt is back with another edition of Felony Friday, his weekly look at the broken criminal justice system. Until then, folks, live long and live free.